Hey, what's going on, guys? Alex, not that one, the other one. Back for another prospect profile. We're going to focus on some combine standouts for the next few videos, especially guys at positions of need for the Chargers. Before we do that, of course, the shameless plugs to get out of the way. If you like me, you can find me on Twitter at Alex Katson, the same way it's spelled on the screen there. I'm mostly focusing on compiling all the pro day testing numbers right now. But I also write for Chargers Wire with Gabino Borquez, who you guys have seen on the channel before. We just came out with a 7-round Chargers mock draft that I think turned out really well. No one was mad about it, which is the first time that that's happened in the history of mock drafts. So we were pretty excited about that. I'll also be releasing a full first-round mock draft on Chargers Wire in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. Also, of course, subscribe to the channel so that you catch everything that Steven, Tyler, Alex, Arjun, and the whole gang are putting together, because it is hands down the best Chargers content you can get. I say that as someone completely unbiased while providing you a video on the channel. We are going to go ahead and get into it. Today, we're going to talk about Bryce Ford-Wheaton, who is a receiver from West Virginia. He's a guy who I got the chance to see at the Shrine Bowl in Vegas back in January, early February. And I was frankly pretty surprised that he tested as well as he did at the combine. He was someone that had a pretty solid week of Shrine Bowl practice, but wasn't like one of those guys that stood out a ton. Obviously, you had someone like Zay Flowers, and a lot of people liked the week that Arkansas receiver Jaden Hazelwood put together. And Bryce Ford-Wheaton was kind of one of those guys that was um, not bad and not like he had his moments where it wasn't just like, oh, I forgot that he was there completely. But someone who was just kind of, solid over the course of the week, and not someone that I was expecting to test as well as he did. But we are going to talk about him as a prospect and as a Chargers fit because he has met with the Chargers. He met with the Chargers at the combine. He said during his media availability that he spent a lot of time with the Chargers, is the way that he phrased it. He also included the Commanders, the Vikings, and the Jets on that list of teams that he spent a lot of time with. He's also met with the Steelers. He grew up a Steelers fan. His girlfriend lives in Pittsburgh, and so there's a lot of connections to the Steelers there as well. But he spent a lot of time with the Chargers at the combine. Most teams, and most of the time, that does indicate that they're at least interested in a player. Obviously, for the Chargers, it doesn't always mean that, because Tom Telesco is weird. And so sometimes it just means that they're meeting with him for the sake of meeting with him, because the Chargers draft a lot of players that they don't meet with at all during the process, or or at least players that they meet with and it never gets out that they met with them. So we have no idea. Some background on Bryce. He is, as we talked about, a receiver from West Virginia. He's a redshirt senior, so fifth year, high school class of 2018. As of recording this video, he is 22, but by the time you guys see it, he'll probably be 23, because his birthday is on March 9th, and I'm recording this on the evening of March 8th. So he'll be 23 by the time you guys see it. He'll be a 23-year-old rookie. Happy early birthday, Bryce, if you, for some reason, come across this video. He is 6'3.5", 221 pounds. Those are his measurements from the combine. And he worked out at that weight and did all of his drills and everything at that weight. So that's probably going to be his playing weight in the NFL, which is always a good point of information to have, because sometimes you have guys like Bryce Young who weigh in at 204 pounds and then don't work out at all, and it tells you nothing. Ford-Wheaton was a 3-star recruit who picked West Virginia over 4 other Power 5 offers. Louisville was in the mix there. Washington State was in there. Kind of those sorts of like lower tier Power 5 schools. He's from North Carolina originally, and none of the ACC schools in North Carolina offered him. So he chose to go to West Virginia, where his grandfather and uncle both played. Both of them are named Garrett Ford. His grandfather is Garrett Ford Sr., his uncle is Garrett Ford Jr. They both played running back for the Mountaineers. His grandfather is a West Virginia University Hall of Famer for his contributions to the football team, and then also as an administrator at the school. So lots of legacy for him at West Virginia. It's a pretty easy decision for him there. As we said, he met with the Chargers among some other teams at the combine. He's talked to them a ton. He said that he watches a lot of Mike Williams and a lot of T. Higgins. So when he was talking about the Chargers, he kind of brought up unprompted that Mike Williams is a guy that he looks up to in the league. He's someone that he watches a lot, and so it um, kind of goes without saying that it would be a dream come true for him to play with Mike Williams. So that's something to keep in mind as well, and that's something that you can definitely see on his film. We'll get into that in a second as well. In his career, in 38 career games, he has 143 receptions for 1,867 yards and 15 touchdowns. So a little bit less productive than some of the other guys we've profiled on the channel. Obviously, guys like Rashee Rice, who's fifth in program history at a pretty storied program, going to be way more productive than him. But keep in mind that West Virginia's offense and West Virginia's team in general was pretty bad. So, 1,867 yards is still pretty good. They've produced a few NFL players while he's been around, so he hasn't always been the top guy. He did lead West Virginia in receptions and yards this season, so he was kind of the top guy on a not so great team, but still drew a lot of attention and had a lot of production. Not something where like I'm overly worried about it, but definitely some smaller numbers than we're used to seeing from some of the other profiles we've done. And then at the combine, which is the reason that we're talking about him today, he went out and he crushed every single drill. He ran a 4.3840. He ran sub 7 in the 3 cone. He ran sub 4.2 in the shuttle. He jumped 41 inches. He jumped a 10'9" broad jump. And all of that is a relative athletic score of 9.96. The score is still unofficial because Kent, the guy who does RAS, doesn't have the 20-yard split for Wheaton's 40-yard dash yet, because those numbers take a while to um, verify. And so those are still unofficial numbers. And so that number, that 9.96 number might fluctuate a little bit. But basically, what that number tells you is that Ford-Wheaton is a 99.6th percentile athlete, roughly. It's not an exact one-to-one conversion to percentile because the data set also includes Bryce Ford-Wheaton himself. And so it gets a little confusing with the math, but it's also a large enough data set that it's basically a percentile. So that's the easiest way to think about it is basically he's an insane athlete. He's like a top tier athlete. Um, so you go to the film, and some of the things that immediately stick out. Obviously, that athleticism sticks out. Anytime you have a guy that's in the 99th or higher percentile as an athlete, those are guys that are going to rise up draft boards throughout the process. Those are guys that even if the NFL has been in on them and media is kind of slow to catch up, those are the guys that go to the combine and the media catches up because they're like, oh, right, he runs a 4.3840 and he's 6'3", 220. Okay, yeah, he should probably be in, X round. Um, Also, we talked about how West Virginia was not very good. That actually ended up being a good thing for Bryce every now and then because he got to show off his very, very large catch radius. West Virginia's quarterbacks were not very accurate, and calling them not very accurate is probably a little bit generous, to be honest. But it's very apparent on tape that Ford-Wheaton is able to extend outside of his frame and make some of those kind of ridiculous catches that we've seen. Again, that's where kind of like that Mike Williams influence kind of plays in. One of the very first plays that I saw of Ford-Wheaton watching his tape was a catch against Pitt in the first game of the season this year, where JT Daniels kind of just throws up a prayer to him on the sideline, and Ford-Wheaton goes up and gets it, catches it out of frame, and gets the toes down. Looked exactly like a Mike Williams catch. And you immediately go, oh, yeah, you can tell that this guy watches a lot of Mike Will. He also is very good generally about flashing his hands late. And so what I mean by that is that when you're running with a DB, you're stride for stride with them, and you're tracking the ball down the field. You don't want to show your hands and extend out for that ball too early because a lot of times the DB doesn't have their head turned around. They don't know where the ball is, and so if they see that you're extending your hands out to catch the ball, then that's their cue to kind of get their head around, find the ball in the air, and knock it away. But what Ford-Wheaton is really good at, and what a lot of NFL receivers are really good at, is you track the ball in the air, and then you give the DB basically no indication that the ball is like basically about to hit you guys. And then like at the very last second, then you stick your hands out, you haul that in, and then you have that reception, and the DB can't do anything about it because they don't even realize that the ball is there. So that's a really big point for him, especially as someone who we'll talk about in a second doesn't really create a ton of separation, which is weird because of what the kind of caliber of athlete that he is. Um, but because he's so big, like we talked about, he's 6'3" and a half, he's 220 pounds. Um, and he's willing enough to engage. It's not a consistent thing, but he's willing to do it every now and then. He's a really good blocker when he wants to be. Um, because he's big and he has these longer arms and you can tell that there's a lot of power behind them, and like DBs just have nowhere to go if he latches onto them, and that's something that is going to be a big point for the Chargers, both because you look at the way the offense operated when Keenan Allen got injured. Keenan Allen, who's probably the best blocking receiver on the Chargers, um, he gets injured, and then all of a sudden, a lot of those quick game plays that Joe Lombardi was running don't work anymore. And you go back and you look and you say, okay, why weren't these working? Beyond the fact, Keenan Allen's not playing, we're not throwing it to him, we're not throwing it to Mike Williams, and you go back and look, and it's because no one else in that receiving room can block because they're all tiny. You don't have the problem with Ford Wheat. Um, and it's also important because with the hire of Kellen Moore, the Chargers have talked a lot about wanting to improve the run game, and then also Brandon Staley is always going to put a huge emphasis on special teams. That's something that Ford Wheaton has talked about in interviews that he's given in the past, is that he really takes pride in playing special teams, and so I think that that is probably one of the main reasons that the Chargers have talked to him as much as they have, is because you're essentially looking at a guy who can step in right away and essentially replace Jalen Guyton. Not like an exact one for one replacement of Jalen Guyton, but can basically play that exact role of a speed threat who's also going to be your primary gunner on special teams. Um, and then also, because Ford Wheaton has primarily played on the outside in college, which is a rarity for this draft class, we actually have evidence on tape that he can beat press coverage, which is not the case for, I would say, 90% of the receivers in this draft class, which is really nice to see because press coverage is a reality of the NFL. DBs are bigger and more physical, and they're willing to get up in your grill. And so you have to have a way to beat press coverage. And Ford Wheaton has that. He has a couple release packages in his bag. He really likes this kind of like hop step release that looks like essentially like he's going to run a slant, and then instead he takes it vertical. Um, but he's got a few different ones. They're all pretty effective. Granted, against Big 12 corners, the reputation is changing a little bit on that conference and the quality of their defensive play, but it's still, it's the Big 12. Reputations are hard to get rid of. But still, there's evidence that he can do it. That's more than you can say for a lot of guys. Weakness wise, we touched on the separation briefly. It's really weird because he has the athleticism, he has the release packages to create separation at the line, but for whatever reason, on all of these downfield routes, he's always covered. Um, it doesn't always matter because of the way that he attacks the ball in the air and the way that he can win contested catches, which is where kind of that T. Higgins comparison comes into play. Is you see a guy who, like T. Higgins was a guy coming out of Clemson who basically couldn't separate. And it turns out that it just doesn't matter if you are bigger and stronger and more willing to go up and catch the ball in the air than the DB. And Bryce Ford-Wheaton kind of has that element of his game to him. But it's odd that he can't create separation consistently. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then also as a run after catch guy, obviously he ran a 4.3840. He's got a sub 7-second time in the three cone. Both are great times for a guy his size, but I didn't really see a ton of run after catch potential. He's not really a very creative lateral runner. West Virginia threw a lot of tunnel screens to him, where basically he would line up on the outside and then kind of run towards the offensive line as the offensive line kind of parted to essentially make a tunnel, which is why it's called a tunnel screen, for him to run through. And he's effective on those, but he basically only gets what's blocked for him. There's no creativity to really like shift outside of those lanes and read leverage of blocks and like break a big play. Like every single one of those plays was like 6, 7, maybe 10 yards. None of them were like, oh, this is a tunnel screen that we're going to run to Bryce and he's going to take it 80 yards to the house. Like it's not, that's not there. And then versatility wise, he did primarily play on the outside, which is a good thing for this receiver class because most of the receivers are slot limited guys. But what was weird is that he almost exclusively played on the left side of the formation. And he addressed it at the combine. He said basically West Virginia only asked him to play on the left side of the formation, as kind of a prototypical X receiver, I guess. Um, he thinks that he can play on the right side or play in the slot, do whatever a team wants him to do. Obviously, anytime that you ask a player about that sort of thing, they're going to say, I can do whatever a team wants me to do. Like a guy like Tank Dell will say, like, yeah, I can go and play on the outside, even though he's 5'8". Like, it's just players believing in themselves and they have every right to do that. But without evidence on tape of him being able to do that, that's a projection. And that's something that you have to reckon with as an NFL decision maker and as someone that's evaluating his game is he says he can do that, but can he actually do that? I have no proof of whether or not he can. West Virginia did use him in motion packages a lot, but they never did anything with that motion. It was always just kind of eye candy before the snap, where they'd run him in kind of these orbit motions like you see in the NFL now. And then instead of throwing him a quick screen or handing him the ball on a jet sweep or something, it would just kind of be a clear out motion. And that was also something that was weird to me because you look at West Virginia and you look at the offense that they fielded, and it's like, why are you not trying to get the ball into the hands of this elite athlete who's very clearly your best player on like every play? And instead they're using him as a decoy essentially. And so like I think that he has the potential to do those sorts of things when he gets to the NFL, but it's potential. It's not I know for certain he can step into the NFL and take those jet sweep reps or, play that kind of like big slot role that Pittsburgh loves to employ, like with Chase Claypool or Deontay Johnson or someone like that. Like, I don't know for sure that Bryce Ford-Wheaton can do that in the NFL. Maybe he can, maybe he can't. And then consistency. Even some of the things that we talked about as strengths trace wise kind of come and go between and within games. So game to game, like it's almost like watching two completely different players every time you turn on a game of Bryce Ford-Wheaton. Like you never know what you're going to get. And even within games, like he'll have a stellar first quarter and then kind of disappear for the second quarter and then come back and dominate for the third quarter. And it's just like it's a very up and down experience. There's going to be some leveling out that needs to happen for sure once he gets to the NFL if he's going to stick around as like a meaningful contributor. Um, that says Rice, but it should say Ford-Wheaton. Got a 6.35 on my grading scale, which is a low fourth rounder. Um, that grade includes his athletic testing, which bumped him up from the fifth round to the low fourth, which I think I'm more comfortable with. I think uh, as we were just talking about, NFL teams are going to need to diagnose where those inconsistencies are coming from and then also cure those if he's going to hit his potential. I did hear a few things while I was at the Shrine Bowl that lead me to believe that those inconsistencies are fixable and coachable. But other people have heard other things, and like the rumor mill is constantly churning, and you're constantly hearing different things because everyone has an agenda to push this time of year, and so it's really impossible to know until you actually get him in a locker room. And some NFL team is going to have to be comfortable with making that decision. I think ultimately the fourth round is about the spot where I would be comfortable making that decision, just because like those are rare traits to bet on. Like we talked about, like elite athleticism. Those are the type of guys that always get pushed up the board in the NFL. Like that's going to be Bryce Ford-Wheaton. You're going to overdraft him a little bit because you're betting on the athletic upside. Um, as far as the Chargers go, they've shown interest. We talked about throughout, and I can definitely see that vision. Like I said, uh, you look at a guy that has the downfield speed ability and also takes pride in and excels on special teams, and it kind of immediately says like, "Oh yeah, that's the Jalen Guyton replacement." Jalen Guyton obviously might be back on the roster, we don't know, but also he's recovering from the torn ACL. And so you look at a guy like Ford-Wheaton and you say like, "Oh yeah, that's a role that we can use him in, is essentially purely a speed threat and then also deploy him on special teams." But also, you look at the long-term health of Mike Williams, who, missed a decent chunk of time this season, is only getting older, has a contract that is ballooning in cap hit while the Chargers are running out of money. And if Mike Williams gets injured again in 2023, then Bryce Ford-Wheaton is someone that can step in and play that role. He's not going to play it as well as Mike Williams does, obviously, but he's going to play it better than Josh Palmer, Michael Bandy, DeAndre Carter could, because he has the size and like that's someone that he watched growing up, and so like he knows that game, and he's effective in that sort of way. And so if you want to draft him and say that he's going to be the speed threat, in 2023 and 2024, perhaps, and then say, we're not confident in Mike Williams's body holding up beyond 2024, or we're not confident that Mike Williams is going to be worth $20 million in 2025. Then I could see, okay, let's potentially move off Mike Williams because we have Bryce Ford-Wheaton already in house and he's already, developing and coming along, and we've kind of ironed out some of those inconsistencies that are on the West Virginia tape. And so we're comfortable moving forward with him as that kind of primary outside threat. All right. So that is going to about do it for today. We went a little bit more in depth than we have in the past, about 22 minutes on Bryce Ford-Wheaton. I hope you guys enjoyed. Obviously, as the draft gets nearer and nearer, we have more information, and I want to share all of that with you guys so that you're as familiar as possible with some of these guys, especially someone like Ford-Wheaton, where the Chargers have met with him. There's confirmed interest, and so there's not necessarily a significantly higher chance, but a higher chance that the Chargers end up selecting him in April. And so obviously, we want you guys to be as familiar as possible with the guys the Chargers do pick. So hopefully you are cool with a little bit longer of a video for those reasons. Um, I will be back probably pretty soon here. We got a couple more on the docket. Like I said at the top, we're going to run through some combine standouts, especially those guys at position of need. So you look at wide receiver, tight end, edge, guys like that. We'll probably touch on some offensive linemen. We'll do some linebackers, especially as free agency gets going and we kind of have a better idea of who's coming back and who's not. So super excited for that. Make sure you subscribe to the channel to see all those when they come out. And then also follow me on Twitter at Alex Katson. That's Katson with a K, like you see on the screen there. All right, guys. See you next time. Take it easy.